Good evening, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you to our first webinar meeting. YES Group is a group of young pediatric endocrinologists belonging to the European Society of Pediatric Endocrinology. We welcome you to join us in this special evening with our special guest, Professor Stefano Cianfarani. Let me introduce the professor to you guys. Professor Stefano is a professor of pediatrics from Department of System Medicine, University of Rome. He is the chief of endocrinology and diabetes unit, Bambino Ghizo Children's Hospital at Rome. Professor Cianfarani is also an affiliated researcher, Department of Women's and Children's Health, Karolinska Institute at Stockholm. And of course, he is the editor-in-chief of Hormone Research in Pediatrics. And at the moment, he is the chair of Clinical Practice Committee within the European Society of Pediatric Endocrinology. We are very lucky to have Professor Stefano joining us in this evening to enlighten us how to publish our manuscripts. So the floor is yours, Professor. Thank you very much for your time that you spare with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Hussein, for your kind presentation. It's a clear pleasure for me to stay here with you, especially with young fellows, with the young colleagues as you are. And of course, I would like that this kind of meeting would be very informal. So please do not hesitate to make any question, comment, or integration you would like to make without any fear, in a quite informal atmosphere. I start sharing my screen if I success in doing that. Okay, can you see the presentation now?
Yes, we see it. Just to go on presentation mode, please. Yes, perfect.
So the title of this presentation is quite, general title, How to Get Your Biomedical Paper Published. And honestly, I download a large part of this presentation from this book, which I strongly encourage you to buy and read. It has been published in Karger, which is the same publishing company of Hormone Research in Pediatrics. And how you see the title of this book is How to Get Your Biomedical Paper Published, a practical guide for graduate students and postdocs. I think it's quite useful. You will see many figures, many pictures actually downloaded from this book. So I think the first question we can start from is this one. What differentiates an outstanding paper from a poorly written one? Because I think that's the basic point to start with when we we think to write down a paper a scientific paper for any kind of journal. And first of all, the first point to write down a paper, including a scientific paper, is a story to tell. I mean, we have to write down something when we have something to tell, something to describe, and so a story. So we have to have in mind something to tell to the audience, and so we have to have in mind a story. The second point, so the content of the paper we would like to write down. The second point is the style. So the format, I would say the kind of presentation of our story. We want to tell a story, and we also want to tell the story in the proper manner, the proper way. So the style is very important. It should be scientific, direct, concise, and simple. So it doesn't have to be literary, diffuse, complicated. We have to keep in mind I would say, the ideal figure of the reader of our paper, of our story. The third point is a single question, which is being asked in the top section of the paper. So we don't have to confuse our reader or our readers, and we have to keep in mind, and we have to explain first in the introduction, and then of course we will see that in the abstract and in the title, the single, or at least the main question we would like to address in our story. So it's much better to have one single question to address in our paper, rather than have many or different questions, but with lack of importance. So this question we put at the beginning of our story has to be answered by experimental and or epidemiological data, or the same can be applied to a hypothesis, which has to be tested during our story, instead of posing a mix of different questions of a mix of different hypotheses. Then we have to write down, at least in our mind, the importance of our findings before starting our story, before starting to write down our paper. Are our findings really relevant or not? This, of course, is opposed to so what, after considering the findings of our experiments or our trial or our study. Then the data are novel. The importance, the need to tell a story is closely related to the novelty of our story, because if our story is not novel at all, probably there is no need to tell the story. So we have to be quite certain that this is not a repeat or a minor modification of previous findings. This implies that we have to know very well the literature around the same topic, the same issue we are tackling in our study, in our paper. Then the style and the contents of the paper should be tailored to the audience. And we mean the audience, of course, the colleagues, the scientists, the colleagues, the physicians in the same field of interest of our story, of our paper. So we don't have to be to address technical super expert, and at the same time we don't have to address the story for a lay public. So we have to target in the proper way the audience of our paper. And finally, the potential reader of our story, of our paper, should be guided by the author through the entire paper. So we have to guide in a proper manner with some explanation, and for each concept, for each paragraph, I would say, for each major point of our paper, we should explain why and how something was done in our study. So I think this table summarizes quite well the main points each paper should address before being written down, of course, before being submitted to any kind of journal. I think also that the temporal sequence of writing is very important. In this table, you see the first point would be the journal selection, but in my mind, this point should be after the results section of our paper. The core of the paper, the core of the study, are of course results. And I would suggest, as also suggesting this figure, that we should start with tables and figures summarizing the major findings of our study, and then write down the results section together with materials and methods. After these first major steps, we can start thinking about the journal the ideal journal which could be interested in our results. This is important to do just after being I would say, careful in writing down the main results of our study in terms of both tables and figures, and also in the results section. Then, after this main part of our manuscript, which once again resides in the results and tables and figures and the results section, we can start writing down the introduction and discussion with, of course, the pertinent references. And the two final steps of writing include the abstract and the title. We will see why these are so important and should be actually left at the end of the writing process. Results. You see, we can summarize results in tables and graphs. Both tables and graphs are important for explaining the major findings of our study. Of course, tables should express quantitative values, raw data, of course, data that do not fit into any simple pattern. Graphs, I mean pictures, figures, are much more impressive for the reader. So at least one or two figures should be left in the manuscript, because the pictures actually give the real idea and are very simple to read through for the reader. So line graph should be used for demonstrating a time course or dose dependency. When we compare different groups, we can use the bar graphs and other kind of I would say, less common pictures. Usually in a scientific papers, we use line graphs and bar graphs, including, of course, the box plots and everything like that. This is a classical example of tables in the content of which cannot be included in a figure. You see different groups. In this case, I just showing the one of the tables of our paper published in Lancet Endocrinology and Diabetes about the SAGE results, and we describe the different risk groups of children and adolescents exposed to GH therapy. You see that the number of variables is so high, and in this case, we need a table to describe that instead of a figure. As the same is for also this other table describing the main diagnosis according to the different risk groups of our cohort of patients. So it's quite clear that when we have so many variables and so many information, of course, numbers expressed as in this case standard mortality ratio, but any kind of indices. In this case, we cannot use a figure. This is another kind of picture. When we describe a cohort, a study cohort, in this case is a phase 3 clinical trial for one of the long-acting growth hormone drugs. You see, when we describe a clinical trial cohort, it's important to use this kind of picture or algorithm or flow chart, describing in detail the characteristics, the features of the cohort which was included in the trial. You see, we start from the overall screen patients, and we also describe the number of them, the part of them which failed screening, the final group which underwent randomization, and the number randomized for the study drug and randomized for the control group. And then, of course, it's important also to describe potential withdrawals and potential loss to follow-up. And finally, to give the final figure of the number of patients who completed treatment in both study group and control group. So this is another kind of picture which should be used for when we describe when we tell a story about the outcome of a clinical trial. Then we describe some results in the form of figures. Here we see an example of a figure which actually is completely useless. You see that in this case, only two groups are compared. We express the mean and we express the standard deviation of two groups. We don't need this kind of figures with a couple of bars. We can provide the same information, just writing down in the results the same kind of content. But we need a figure also to be more clear for the readers when we describe the comparison of different groups, as in the case of this second figure. In this case, we need a figure. We need to describe the comparison among groups with different bars. And of course, we also need to describe the potential significant differences among the different groups with asterisks, as in this case. So the essential elements of a figure are, first of all, they should be simply structured. They should be easy to understand. They should convey a clear message. Has, of course, a meaningful title. We have to give a title to each figure as well as to each table. And each title should be read without reading the main text. Should be completely independent and provide the main information we want to convey through that figure or that table. Has all the groups labeled correctly, contain control and study groups at the same time, and of course gives the statistical significance between the means, providing also a standard deviation or standard error, whatever you want. When we write down the text, especially the results text, but also introduction and the discussion section, it's important not to just to make a phrase and a full stop, but also linking each sentence each other. It's important to provide a logical flow for the reader and facilitates the readability of our paper. Because if we just give a sentence, then a full stop, another sentence without any link, for example, putting therefore or in contrast or furthermore, just to link in the second sentence with the previous one, it is very important to give more fluency to the reading of our paper. It's the same also for the paragraph, without, of course, avoiding I would say, overdoing that. But usually, the mistake we do is the opposite. We just put one sentence, full stop, another sentence, full stop, which is quite awkward for the readers. When we when we write down the results section, in the ideal style, we should have in mind the same scheme, the same format of the overall manuscript, which means introduction, methods, results, and discussion. And ideally, we should subdivide the results section in different modules according to different major findings. So we should summarize the purpose of that experiment or of that observation, describing the step, then reporting the results, in case just referring to a figure or a table, and quite briefly reporting the meaning of our finding. This is an example to determine, we measure, we found that indicating that. It is important not for the results section, just not giving a list of results, a list of findings, but providing a description also in quite, I would say, in detail of the reasoning which we follow for obtaining that particular result, that particular finding. This is a good, I would say, a good suggestion to follow in writing down the results section. So the results section should be structured in such a way that the reader can easily follow and understand the different points. This can be done best by subdividing the results section in small portions, as I mentioned before, in different modules, whereby each portion is structured in a similar way as the structure of the entire paper. So now, once again, introduction, methods, results, and I would say discussion or major findings. And specifically, you should explain why you performed a particular experiment with a mini introduction, how you did it with methods, what you found, the results per se, what it means, something like a discussion. Then you go on to the next module and repeat everything, describing all the results you obtain in your study in the results section. So after making the major or the good table or the good figures, the good tables, the good figures, and writing down the results section, you can have in mind which journal could be ideal to submit your paper. And at this stage, you can start writing down the introduction and then the discussion of the paper. Writing down the introduction is important because, of course, it's the first chapter of your story. And the introduction should be written in such a way that it guides the reader stepwise from the broad general context to your specific scientific question that you wanted to answer in your study, or, of course, to a hypothesis that you wanted to test in your study. Sometimes inexperienced writers think the introduction should be just a literature review, but it's not the case. So the introduction should provide the rationale why you worked on that research project. Therefore, it should not only state what is known in the field, but it should also highlight what is not known in that particular field and what merits a new experimental or clinical approach. So the best way to start writing an introduction is to begin with a broad general statement and then gradually narrow down the information until you arrive at your specific point. Just to give you a figure of this concept, and comparing the introduction with the discussion section, the introduction should start from a general introduction to the topic, and then going down, describing what is not, but especially what is not known in that particular field, and actually ending with a specific question or specific hypothesis you want to test. The opposite is for discussion. You should start from the specific points, which means the specific findings you have in your study, you have just written down in your paper, and then you go to providing the meaning of your findings, and then linking your findings, the meaning of your findings, with the general knowledge in that field. So it's an inverse pyramid for the introduction and the pyramid structure for the discussion section. What about discussion? Discussion should start for the most specific points, so your major findings, and gradually get more and more general until you discuss at the end how all this fits into the big picture. Your data can either provide strong support for a widely accepted principle or they can suggest something. And in this case, you have to choose the right verbs according to the strength of the evidence of your findings. For example, your findings may suggest weak evidence, indicate or argue for, support, or provide compelling evidence. If your finding is so new, so novel, or even so in contrast with the previous knowledge of the field, you can use this kind of expression, provide compelling evidence. So the increasing degree of certainty is closely related to the increased degree of evidence, the strength of evidence of your findings. It's always a good way to write a paper to dedicate a paragraph addressing the limitations of your study. And it is important to do it in an honest, self-critical way to demonstrate that you have given thought about that. For example, the validity of a certain method. It is important because it's a sign of honesty, but it also will impress both the reviewers and the readers. And aim to show that despite any limitations, and all studies have limitations, even the studies published in Nature or Science, in spite of them, your finds anyway add value to the scientific literature in that specific field, and therefore are worthy of publication. Sorry. Finally, it's important not ignoring or obfuscating other research papers in the same field simply because they contradict your conclusions or do not fit into your hypothesis. You must mention that there are deviating findings or conflicting data published elsewhere, and you have to give credit to your competitors too. So if you can guess that underlying reasons for the different outcome, provide a plausible explanation, but don't just state that the cause for the conflicting results might be based on different experimental conditions. This is a just general sentence, quite, I would say, quite useless. And it's important to have in mind that probably your paper will go to an expert as a reviewer who already published something in the same field. So he or she knows very well the literature and the field. So it's not intelligent to obfuscate or ignore previous papers just because they contradict our findings. You have to mention them in case you have an explanation for the different results. You have to explain your hypothesis about the different results. But even when you don't have a clear explanation for explaining different findings, different results, you have to mention the previous papers, just saying that they are in conflict with your results, with your findings. Then we go to the abstract. You see, we are almost okay, I've got a question from Somaya. Dear Stefano, thank you for excellent talk. If our data includes a rare condition whose exact incidence is not known, how many cases in your data are sufficient to make it original article rather than the case series? I think it depends on the mechanisms. In case you, for example, in our more research in pediatrics, we have a section dedicated to novel insights into clinical practice. A quite common mistake of submitting authors is to submit just case reports, sometimes just explaining new mutations of well-known conditions. But if you have a mechanistic insight, even in a already previously known condition, that could be a research paper, or anyway could go, for example, in my journal, in the section of novel insights into clinical practice, because the novel insights underline the importance of knowing or providing novelty in pathophysiological mechanisms, including not necessarily many cases with the same conditions, but even just a single case, but quite carefully studied with many experiments, providing new information about pathophysiology of that condition. I was talking about the abstract. The abstract is as important as the results tables and figures. So it should be left at the end, or almost at the end. Actually, the last step of your writing process should be the title. Just before title, you have to be quite careful in writing down the abstract. And the abstract is especially important, and it pays off to invest a lot of time into writing it. First, the journal's editor, like me, for example, will likely make a decision to send to peer review based just on the title and abstract. So the abstract should be attractive and clear. Secondly, a potential reader will judge whether to read your full paper just based on the abstract. So the abstract is very important, because I would say this is the business card of your paper and of your study. So it should contain all the keywords, because they will be listed in the scientific e-database, electronic databases. A powerful abstract should be tightly packed with information and data, and of course devoid of empty phrases. So like the entire paper, but in miniature form, the abstract should contain an introductory sentence stating the problem, asking a question or raising a hypothesis, a summary of the data, and end with a short interpretation and conclusion. Normally, the size of an abstract is limited, 350 words. So it's important to carefully choose the wording and eliminate verbose sentences, omit everything which is not essential. You may also use abbreviations as long as you define them the first time they appear. And please use up all the space available for your abstract. So the abstract should be in some way concise, but full of information. So concise, but complete. And finally, the title. The title should be the last item you write for your manuscript. This will give you enough time to think about it, and ideally come up with several tentative working titles until you make a final decision. An important point to follow in writing down a scientific paper is that when you, I think when you decide to tell the story of your study, it's important to write down, even before a draft, write down an outline of the main findings, the main messages you want to convey with your paper. After doing that, the first draft should be quite rough, I would say. So don't be it's not so important to be clear, and even in the selection of phrases and paragraphs and words in the first draft, because the hard work will be to refine together with the co-authors of your paper. Could be important after the first draft to put your paper in sharing your paper, your draft, with the other co-authors, at least with the most important authors of the paper. For example, using a sharing doc platform, like for example Doc Google. In this way, everybody can in some way help you in writing down the next drafts after the first one. And the same is for the title. It should be the last step of your writing process, but you have to think about that. Probably you have also to change many times the title of your paper. The people choose from the title whether to read a paper or ignore it. So the title is important. should contain the major keywords, and medical journals request that study design should be present in the title of the paper, for example, double-blind or case control, because this gives the reader the initial impression of how strong is the evidence you are going to present in the paper. It is a good way to proceed to put in the title the major conclusions of your paper. So the reader already know that from the title, the major finding of your paper, it is also at this stage also invited in some way or attracted in reading down all the rest of your paper. It's a good also way to, in writing down the title, to avoid questions in the title, because they are ambiguous and leave the reader without any clue about the real content of your story, of your paper. Now I would like to dedicate the last 2 or 3 slides in some time providing you what happens from the other side of the desk, which means from the editor, like I am in my position, from the reviewer point of view. So first of all, I would like to give you some insights on the reasons why papers are usually rejected, and even rejected before review. You know, all the papers submitted to hormone research in pediatrics are reviewed by me, by myself. So the first screening is done by the editor-in-chief. Of course, it's sometimes painful to reject papers before review, but I would say that at least 30% of submitted papers to hormone research, even more probably, are rejected before review by me. Why? Because some requirements need to be fulfilled, and these requirements should be quite clear in the mind of the editor-in-chief. First of all, the scope of the journal. So is the paper within the scope of the scope of the journals means the typical readers of the society, of the journal, and the scientific societies. You know, for example, that hormone research in pediatrics is an official journal of 3 major pedendo societies: European, American, Latin American. So we have some, the journal has some stakeholders, the readers, scientific societies, and researchers. So the first question is that particular paper within the scope of the journal? In other words, is that particular paper sufficiently interesting or potentially interesting for the stakeholders of my journal? Then which value does the study add to the journal? And in this case, I have to be honest, it's important for the editor-in-chief especially, to look after the potential of the paper in attracting citations in the future. You know that each journal is in some way scored according to the impact factor. The impact factor is the result of the number of published papers divided by the number of citations. So it's important to have each paper quite well cited. So it's important to look for the potential of that paper in this case. Then, is the paper within the scope of the specific journal section? In our case, we have the mini review, the research article, and the novel insights into pedendo. I already mentioned the quite common confusion between the novel insights and just mere case reports without any novel pathophysiological, diagnostic, or therapeutic insight. Of course, an important point is the English language, and again, the ethical issue. of a specific paper. Then let's go to the reviewer approach. The reviewer approach can be actually summarized in these different questions. Was the study worth doing? What research questions were to be addressed, the rationale of the story, of the study? What do existing studies show? What is the originality of this study in particular? Was a new study warranted? What about the study design? Was the study design appropriate, cross-sectional, longitudinal, observational? Was that biased by the inclusion-exclusion criteria, the time of follow-up, the matching of study cohorts? Was the study group sufficiently large? And which new information that the study added to the existing knowledge of the field? So the most frequent reasons for rejections are conclusions not supported by the data, study is too preliminary or incomplete. So when you write down, I mean, you can discover this weak point writing down the results section at the beginning of your paper, because you can quite easily get the fact that your study is still incomplete when you write down the results section, you write down the tables and figures before writing the rest of the paper. The lack of novelty, the flaws in the experimental design, the flaws in the methodology you used, when the manuscript is poorly written. Finally, if your manuscript actually pass through the editor-in-chief evaluation, pass also through the reviewer evaluation, it's quite common to have the paper back for a revision. It's very uncommon, I would say quite rare, if not exceptional, to have your paper published without any kind of change or revision. So quite often, even very good papers are requested to provide revisions. And the good news is that if the research is sound and your manuscript is well written, you will have the opportunity to submit a revised version of your manuscript, which will be accepted in most cases, provided you follow the critiques raised by the referees. So don't ever expect a reviewer to say that your original manuscript is excellent as it stands and that it should be published without any kind of revision. That is not going to happen. Also keep a number of points in mind. You may find it difficult to cope with criticism, but criticism is a normal process in publishing research. Instead, welcome and accept the criticism and address all the reviewer's points in the reply letter and try to accommodate them. Please evaluate the validity of the criticism and, if necessary, modify or add some experiments. This will improve your paper, will improve your text very much. So your manuscript will improve after incorporating the criticism. In case you do not agree with a specific point, write a very polite rebuttal, but don't reject all the points raised by the reviewers. So be sure to include supporting evidence, especially in case you rebut the criticism, including the references, which support your rebuttal to the criticism. Of course, you can learn a lot from the reviewers' comments, and as you advance in your scientific career, you will become a reviewer yourself, and hopefully following the same points I try to make clear during my presentation. And that's all from my side, but I see another question. Oh, sorry, can you move to the previous point, please? I don't know which point you are talking.
It was
rejection point.
Yes.
Okay, rejection points. Okay. The most frequent reasons for rejections: conclusions not supported by data, study too, I would say, incomplete, the lack of novelty, the flaws in the experimental design, the flaws in the methodology, the manuscript is poorly written.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your time and for the beautiful and informative session that we have learned a lot from you this evening. Much appreciated. I know that you are very busy, but you spared this hour with us, so it is hugely appreciated.
It has been a real pleasure. Whenever you want, you can contact me.
Thank you.
And as I told Hussein, I can also share the PowerPoint presentation if you like.
Perfect. We will share it with ES members. So I'll give you a couple of minutes if you want to have a sip of water. I will run a couple of announcements, then we will open the floor for a Q&A. So let me share a slide with you guys. Okay. And so this is a photo for ES members, and we met at the European Society of Pediatric Endocrinology meeting in September after our launch. That was in Rome, and we held our first meeting after being welcomed by the scientific committee of ESPE, and we encourage young endocrinologists, pediatric endocrinologists to join us. So ES Group stands for Young Endocrinologists, and we work together so we can share expertise and grow careers together by accessing professional development, collaboration, and research opportunities. And what do? We represent early career members within the specific ESPE committees. We organize educational networking events, collaborate with similar early career groups like Genius from ESPE. We provide mentorship opportunities for members, and we keep members up to date with the latest career opportunities. So this is your ES Group. Okay, now we would like to have your questions either by using your microphone, by raising a hand in there, so we take the questions one by one, or by typing them in the chat box. We got Anna Maria saying, thank you for the informative presentation, Prof. So guys, if you have any questions, Elif also thanking you, Professor, for the excellent presentation. And also Dr. Manoj Agarawal. Sumaya, please, Sumaya.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Stefano, for such a nice, good insight of how to write a manuscript. It's really good. I just want to ask one of the practical questions that we normally faced, being a young pediatric endocrinologist, especially I'm belonging to a developing part of the world. If you want to publish an article in a very good journal, one of the most common limitation is the fee of that journal. So can you recommend some good journal who can waive off the fee, especially for the young pediatric endocrinologist or for the developing countries, or any way out that if our article or if our manuscript is really worth to publish, we can get help from anyone?
Well, it's a difficult answer. Honestly, I think that the good point to do is to, in the first step, is to submit to the high impact factor journal, because it's quite, unlikely that a high impact journal will accept your paper. But in case your paper anyway passes the first step and goes to the referees, all the suggestions the points raised by the reviewers may be very helpful for refining and improving the quality of your paper. So in the first stage, I would suggest to aim for a high impact journal, which means in our field that, just to be quite honest, Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, and then going down according to the specific, of course, of the field you are talking about. For example, if your paper is about general pediatric endocrinology, my journal would be a good, good journal to submit. But if it is more oriented for obesity, there is pediatric obesity or pediatric diabetes. But for example, in the diabetes field, I would suggest to, if you have a good paper, a good story to tell, to submit, for example, to Diabetologia or Diabetes Care. And then the second step, after receiving the reviewer's comments and the reviewer's suggestion, and after improving your paper, you can submit to pediatric diabetes.
Great, thank you very much. I got a question, Prof. It says here that the APC, the article processing charge, is the main barrier that stops me from submitting my manuscripts in journals with high impact factor. What would you advise? Sorry,
what is the major impact, the major obstacle?
The charge, the APC, the
okay. That's another good point. Well, for example, in case you are a member of a Pediatric Endocrinology Society, European of ESPE, there is a quite strong discount. I think there is no fee to pay. I think it's also the same for Endocrine Society in publishing on Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism. But in that case, I have no suggestion, because the vast majority, especially for the open access journal, they ask for a quite high fee. And that's the reason why, to be honest, I would discourage to submit, at least in the first stage, to this open access journal. The vast majority of them actually were created for economical reasons instead of scientific reasons. So I would keep your choice within the classical, I would say, the classical track of well-known journal, traditional journals, which are basically JCM and HRP.
Thank you very much. Maya Retovic, she's thanking you very much. Can you kindly share with us your thoughts about the significance of cover letter? Do you have any advice?
Yeah, yes, I didn't mention that in my presentation. Cover letter could be to be honest, is not so commonly read by the editors. Anyway, in the cover letter, apart from the classical sentences which are required by each journal, that of course your paper is not submitted to other journals, there is no conflict of interest, blah blah blah. I think you can put just a paragraph highlighting what you consider the importance or the novelty of the paper you are submitting. So in that case, if the editor reads the cover letter, can have just an idea of the I wouldn't say the major finding, but the major reason why you actually are submitting your paper to that specific journal. So I would dedicate just a short paragraph explaining that.
Thank you very much. Rade Vukovic is thanking you, Professor, for a great talk. And he's raising his hand now as well. So Rade is yours.
Professor, I would like to thank you for an amazing talk, and thank you for helping out the SPS group and everyone else who's participating. And Hussein, amazing job in organizing and moderating all of this. Thank you so much. I would just like to point out also, I've pasted a link in the chat, in the group chat, so everyone can copy it and go to the website. Coursera was a useful resource for many of my colleagues. you have a lot of free courses, and even those courses that like this one, which gives a price of the course, you can actually take the course without paying anything. You just won't get a certificate, but you'll get all the knowledge and extras. So I highly recommend Coursera and this course. And are there any other courses, Professor, maybe that you would like to recommend to young researchers regarding writing in medical sciences?
Thank you for the question. And no, honestly, I don't have in mind other courses at the moment. But I strongly suggest to read the book I put in the first slide at the very beginning. It's just very, very clear to all figures and tables and flowcharts to follow during the writing. About the manager citation platforms, I would say I'm not, and of course, I have no conflict of interest. I use EndNote. In my mind, EndNote is a very good citation manager platform. But there are many other, for example, RefWorks or Mendeley. I've not experienced with other kind of platforms, to be honest.
A question.
And also, both EndNote, EndNote has a version which is free, and Mendeley is also free, right? That's important to our participants.
Okay.
Thank you. Some journals encourage authors to submit their papers by determining the interest of the journal in some topics between time and other. Would HRP take this as well?
Sorry, what is the point?
Let me read it again. Some journals encourage authors to submit their papers by determining the interest of the journal in some topics between time and other. So like, say, for example, this time we're going to talk about thyroid, so encourage authors to submit about thyroid, for example, or something like this.
It's not the case of HRP. It's not the case of, with the exception of special issue, which of course are just focused on specific topics. For the rest of the journal, they're completely open to any kind of submission, of course, within the context of pediatric endocrinology and also diabetology. Okay.
So in the last 3 minutes, I think this is the last question that I have. Would Hormone Research Pediatrics offer a page or two for YES Group members' submissions?
Well, the short question is no, in the sense of any kind of submission should be peer-reviewed, first reviewed by the editor, then peer-reviewed by the reviewers. So there is no, I would say, green card for, unfortunately, probably, but it is the policy of the journal.
Okay, thank you very much. I finished all my questions that I had from the audience. I think in the last couple of minutes, are there any hard questions that need to be asked? Then, right, so Sumaya is asking, what is your suggestion about writing meta-analysis?
Well, yeah, there are some software, even free software for actually considering all the previous papers and for also making the final, the diamond graphs for the meta-analysis. So I mean, it is quite hard work. I think I wrote something 3 or 4 different systematic reviews and meta-analysis. It was a very hard work requiring a lot of time. And then the problem with the meta-analysis is that just after you finish to write down meta-analysis, there are 2 or 3 new papers on the same topic, which can confirm or even be in contrast of the results of your meta-analysis. So it's a hard work. Not always is worth doing that, to be honest. But anyway, for doing the, I would say, the analysis, statistical analysis, there are some free downloading software you can use for that. I don't remember, to be honest, I don't remember the name of this. Or you can quite easily find them in Google, something like that.
Okay, and last question to Katia. Katia Kobat, please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Professor, for a wonderful presentation. So just a quick question. Most of the young people usually start with case reports. So what's the gold recipe to publish a case report?
Once again, Katia, it was implicit in my first answer that I don't like case reports. I understand it's quite easy, but unless you provide something new about that specific case, that specific condition, even in case of quite rare cases, it's very important to provide anyway something of mechanistic explanation of that particular condition. Otherwise, I think it's not worthwhile.
Okay. So once again, I would like to thank you again, Professor, for the last amazing hour that you had provided us. Very informative, and we have learned a lot from you. I would like to remind the audience that please fill the feedback, the evaluation form. That is very important for us, so we could excel in our organization. And please provide us with the suggested topics that you'd like us to bring in the future. Thanks again, Professor, and we'd like
thank you. Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao, ciao.
Take care. Bye-bye.
See you.